Illuminati, all through your body. Feel me? And God said he should his one begotten son to lead the wild into the ways of the man. Follow me. Eat my flesh of my flesh. Come with me.
All right.
Run quick, see.
What do we have here now?
One ride down.
Thank you, Napster Man, for that show bumper music. This is Insiders TV, fantasyinsiders.com. Joining me from myfantasyfix.com is Drew Dinkmeyer. You might know him as Dink Piece or as the guy that soon will take down a qualifier. I'm not sure what it is, but the rule of large numbers says if you are so high so many times for qualifiers, you are bound to hit it eventually, right?
Hopefully. This has kind of been my normal way of doing it over at DraftStreet. For whatever reason, I always have to finish second. I've never not qualified for one of their football, basketball, or baseball finals, and I've never done it before finishing second in at least one qualifier. So, got it out of the way. Hopefully I can knock one down because it is expensive trying to qualify for these damn things, and the earlier you can do it, the more the lighter the load on your bankroll.
That's why I feel like Tuttle, he has, for baseball and now football, he's qualified at the beginning of the season. Like you said, it really helps out as far as your bankroll is concerned, because then you don't have to spend all that money on there.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I tweeted out the scoreboard, and you get the natural response of, well, that second place prize is a nice consolation prize. It's like, yeah, it is, except it's going right into more of these entries. So I'm not really winning it unless I can, the second place prize was $4,000, which for the 420 qualifier, that's, less than 10 entries. So basically, I'm playing 5 entries a week. If I don't qualify in the next 2 weeks, it doesn't matter that I finish second.
Right.
And that's kind of the challenge of this whole thing. And it's a great time to be a player. It's a great time to be a high bankroll player because there's a lot of overlay in these tournaments. But you have to be really careful. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made during the course of the season, but there's also a lot of money to be lost if you're loose with your bankroll.
I think the term is chasing.
Yeah.
Because that is exactly what you're doing. You are chasing it. And as we both know, sometimes you don't always get what you're chasing. I don't even know.
Do you have something in mind there?
I don't even know. That doesn't even refer to anything. I was thinking people are going to think there's a backstory to this. There's not. That's just one of my many sayings. Son, you don't always get what you're chasing.
You're starting to practice your dadisms, aren't you? You're already getting ready. You're just trying to practice. You've got a blackboard up on the wall with all the different quotes and all the different things that you want to pass on to your son. You've already started, haven't you?
Yeah, and I'm not even going to have a son in January. I'm going to have a daughter.
All right, well then you're going to pass it on to your daughter.
But I was practicing for my daughter, 5 years ago. So now I'm practicing for my son in advance.
There you go.
Hopefully there will be some overlap. Anyways, we for those of you who are in the chat, feel free to ask some questions, and we will get to them. And we'll try to get to them right away. We're not going to wait. We'll try. We will interrupt the show just to get to your questions. Caveat: it must be fantasy related.
Football, basketball.
Fantasy football related. As soon as I said it too, I knew that I had to add that because Tuttle is in the chat. And so that was the preface to his smart aleckness. Dave, what is your middle name? My middle name is Brent. Brent. I feel like it was a little I feel like that name it might be I'm a junior. So my dad had it in the 60s. He was ahead of his time, I guess. I feel like Brent is kind of a more popular name in the 80s and not in the 60s.
Yeah.
Drew, what is your middle name?
My middle name is Drew.
What? Drew Dinkmeyer?
No, I go by my middle name.
Okay. All right.
And you can blame the gentleman named Papa Cub in the chat. They thought, and I still don't get this to this day, I've not gotten a good explanation on this. His name is James, and they named me after him, so I'm James Drew Dinkmeyer, but I'm not a junior because his middle name isn't Drew. So I don't understand the purpose of this whole thing. It just caused a lot of heartache for me in school when every single first week of school, is James here? Is James here? I'd have to raise my hand. No, I'm Drew. I'm Drew. It says you're James. No, I'm Drew. And this would happen for my entire life. I still don't understand it to this day.
Well, Papa, you have some questions to be answered then. I hope that Papa Cub is able to come on the show sooner rather than later. We have to get him on the show. He's probably at the top of my list of people to get. It's like Papa Cub and then high-profile athlete. That is the order of how I want my guests to line up on our shows. But we're going to get to some NFL action on Thursday night. Usually you are kind of on the fence about playing or not playing. Tonight you're playing, so that's good, hopefully, maybe.
Yeah, it worked out well last week, the Thursday night action that I played last week too. I did see in a couple leagues that I played, a couple people do the things that, we talk about as being weak options, which is just loading up on the Thursday night game. And I saw a couple of people do that in some double ups. They were like 20-man double ups. But if you're in a 20-man double up and two people are knocking themselves out by just going heavy on one game and it doesn't hit, that increases your odds modestly. And I did all right in the head-to-heads as well. So I've got a few games out there tonight. I think this is a very fadeable game. I think you've got two better-known fantasy, defensive-oriented teams than offensive-oriented. The Bucs are just decimated with injuries. And you've got Mike James as a potential value play out there, but he's not a guy that I think is going to really go off tonight. So I don't think there's a lot of risk there. And the guys that could go off are generally pretty expensive. So I think it's a good fadeable game.
And one thing that we talked about in pre-show was that this is a week, it seems like, especially on FanDuel, putting your lineups together, that there's a lot of overlap. Number one, there just seems like a lot of obvious plays out there. I always have to do the air quotes real small with this shot. But there's a lot of obvious plays, and also the bye week. There are a lot of teams on bye, so the pool is a little bit smaller. That's why later on in the show we'll get to some lineups that I asked people to create with a core group of players, and it was interesting. We'll talk about some of the responses that we got from there. As far as tonight, though, you think it's a fadeable night, even on the Cam Newton front, like on DraftStreet?
I think Cam's a fine play, but he's going to cost you. So that's the thing. I don't mind fading games that I think are going to be modest scoring to low scoring if the players in them that I think are going to do well are expensive already, because there's more downside than upside there if it doesn't go that way. So Cam is a fine play. Steve Smith is the one guy who I'm a little bit scared of tonight because he's pretty cheap and he could go off. He could have a big game. And I'm not comfortable playing him because I'm just wondering at some point Tampa Bay is going to figure out that they have to use Darrelle Revis in something other than zone. And I don't want to be caught with a receiver in that game that Revis locks down. And so I avoided Harry Douglas last week. It worked out very poorly. And I'm going to keep doing this under the assumption that Greg Schiano knows what he's doing, which there hasn't been a lot of evidence to that so far, so I'm not sure why I'm still buying into this. But at some point, if they lock down Revis on the opposing team's top wide receiver, you're going to get near a shutout. He's still playing at an elite level when he gets into coverage. They're just using him very poorly.
We talked about last week about fading Harry Douglas. I felt like maybe I was, looking back, I'll be honest, I said I was due a couple weeks ago and it didn't happen. What happened this past week with NFL? Part of that was Harry Douglas's fault. Looking back, it seems like it was so obvious that he was still a decent play, and I was mad at myself for not playing him. I mean, not playing him anywhere. I mean, I faded him completely, and I felt like my bias or my, you can get kind of pretentious as far as everybody's going to be playing him. I'm not going to play him anywhere. I felt like that went a little too far across all the sites, and it was costly. I mean, he should have at least been played on Star Street from everything that I was looking at, and I didn't. So that's one thing that I don't want to do this week. Someone did ask in the chat, Seeb says, any love for Andre Ellington as a cheap date on DK? That'd be DraftKings. He's 3,000. I did see that Mendenhall didn't practice again today. He has a hurt toe, I think. Is it a hurt toe?
I got the injury report up in front of me, so give me 1 second. It is, it's a toe injury. He, didn't practice yesterday, didn't practice today.
I think he's a decent play for 3,000, especially if it's GPP. I mean, if Mendenhall doesn't play, they need to get Ellington the ball more. I don't know why they're not. Obviously, they're
not going to do it. I mean, that one they misdiagnosed this from the start, from the draft. Andre Ellington is a superior back to Stephon Taylor, and they drafted Stephon Taylor first. They had Stephon Taylor ahead of him in camp. He's finally pushed himself ahead of Taylor, and they're still diagnosing him as just a scat back, and they refuse to even tempt it. And so there were more quotes today from the offensive coordinator that said they're going to continue to be careful monitoring his workload. And, I mean, with 30 snaps, there's always going to be a cap on his upside, and that's the challenge. But he's the best back they have. He's quick, and in a game that I think has some sneaky shootout potential with Arizona and Atlanta, I don't mind him, especially on point per reception sites, because he's usually good for 3 or 4 catches when he is involved in the offense. So DraftKings qualifies as that. So minimum price, full point per reception, totally fine with that as a play.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I'm fine with him as a minimum salary guy, and I think maybe even on DraftStreet, I'll have to check his price on DraftStreet. He's
like 5.7-ish on DraftStreet.
Yeah, and if I had to choose between him or Ivory on DraftStreet, I'd probably choose Ivory. His price is so low that it's like it's too tempting not to play him. I've got to have him on pretty much all my lineups just as a compliment.
Do you think, I mean, last week, the 34 carries thing kind of came out of the blue.
Yeah.
I mean, he hadn't been used that way before. They had Bilal Powell as kind of the lead back before. Do you think Ivory is going to be the lead back again and garner the majority of the touches again?
I don't know. I mean, I do not know, honestly. But if I had to guess, I would say yes.
Because that's the one thing that's holding me back from investing in him more over there. Is I'm just looking at the snap count. I mean, last week he played 53 of 93 snaps, and he got 35 touches.
Right.
So, like, if he was in the game, he was getting the ball. The weeks before that, 9 snaps, 8 snaps. That scares me. So I consider him, for me personally, a little bit more of a GPP play than a main team play. But there's a lot of guys in that 4.5 to 6K range, especially at the running back position on DraftStreet, that we could kick around at some point. I mean, you've got Roy Halou, you've got Andre Ellington, Peyton Hillis at 6.1, Steven Jackson, if he comes back, is 5.6, Mike James tonight is 4.9, Kendall Hunter, if you think the 49ers are going to get into garbage time, is 4.9. There's a lot of interesting plays. Joyke Bell is 4.7. There's a lot of interesting plays in that range.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing with DraftStreet is that the variance is so high. Are we talking about DraftStreet?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure. The variance is so high within the salaries that there's always going to be those plays. Let's go ahead and just get it out of the way. Who do you think? You know that I love to play the cheap tight end. You know I love the cheap tight end. Who do you think?
Who doesn't?
What's that?
Who doesn't, really?
Well, that's a question for another show, I think. Who do you think it is, though, for me?
There's 2 guys that I like more than the guy that I think it is for you.
Okay.
I think it's a gentleman from Green Bay.
Yes.
For you.
Yes, it is.
Andrew Corliss.
It
I believe
is.
his name.
It is Mr. Corliss. Yes. I would love, though, to hear your two cheap tight ends. I feel like there's one for tonight that could be an interesting play, but I want to hear who you have.
It's actually not, and Tim Wright isn't a bad cheap tight end either. Who's the guy you're referencing for tonight? I wouldn't argue with that either. Although he was less involved in the offense last week. The two guys that I'm looking at, Ben Watson for the Saints at just 2.3. No Jimmy Graham in practice today. I really don't think Jimmy Graham's going to play this week. I don't think they need to push this issue. They're off to a really good start. The fact that he didn't get healed enough after a bye week to practice on Wednesday or Thursday, to me, says you don't need to push this. And Ben Watson, a lot of people forget because he's old. He's 32, 33. He's the guy who kept Jordan Cameron on the bench in Cleveland last year. And part of that is because the Browns are idiots. The other part of that is Ben Watson's not that bad. He actually graded out in Pro Football Focus's receiving rankings for tight ends as a top 15 receiving option last year. So you throw that in with Drew Brees for 2.3, I'm all about Ben Watson. The other guy is Joseph Fourier. And, Tony Scheffler was cut this week. Fourier ran a bunch of routes last week in the snaps that he played. Dallas gives up the third most targets per game to tight ends and really struggle in the red zone with tight ends. So I think Fourier is a guy who is an interesting GPP play, especially because it's a little bit boom or bust. I mean, so far he hasn't had more than 3 catches in a game. He hasn't had more than 4 targets in the game. So if he doesn't score, he's probably going to get you sub 5 points. But if he does score and he's shown the propensity to be able to score multiple times in a game, you could get 4 or 5 times your salary. He's just 3.5. So I like both those guys a little bit more than Corliss. I'm just not exactly sure what the plans are for Corliss in terms of the passing game, in terms of being involved. Obviously, he ascends to the number 3 option if James Jones is out. But those are some soft matchups on the outside for Boykin and Jordy Nelson. I don't even know if they'll need to look towards the tight end.
Well, and that's what's interesting. And Mr. Tuttle and I were talking. I don't know if you've talked to him or not, but he was.
I would never talk to Mr. Tuttle.
Well, I don't blame you there. But he was high on Ben Watson, and I don't hate Ben Watson, and I don't hate Fourier because he's 3,500. I think both those options are nice, as is Corliss because he's 2.7. And there is talk about if he's going to block or not, but from what I read today in some of the local papers there, they like him more than the other tight end. What's the other tight end that is like they called Finley Light or Jermichael Finley Light? The name will come to me eventually.
Bostic,
yes. So they have the reason why they like Corliss is because he can adjust better. He knows the plays more on the fly. They think that they might send him deep on some routes. So that is why I think that as far as the guy that has the best chance to score, it's him. But I don't disagree that Fourier or Watson that they don't have a good chance to score. The bottom line is I don't pay for tight ends on DraftStreet. I just
and Davis corrected us. It's not Bostic. It's DJ Williams. That's the guy that they thought. Bostic is the only other guy in DraftStreet's pool, so that was the quickly thing that I looked up. But Davis, of course, is all over the college converts, and Williams has been a guy that they've been trying to bring along in a Finley role. It hasn't really worked out. They haven't got him on the field a ton, but that's the guy, not Bostic.
Actually, what I read in the paper was Bostic was the guy that they were trying to mold into.
Okay.
But DJ Williams, I think he's from Arkansas. He is on their squad as well. So that's why we have this great community. We can all collaborate. And obviously, if you put us together, we know a lot more than the coaches. So if I could request one thing from them, it would be get Corliss the ball. The other two guys that you mentioned, one guy that you mentioned, I'll mention another guy, Eddie Lacy. and I know that you're high on him this week. For me, he's a must-play on FanDuel. And Jordy Nelson, he's a guy that needs to be heavily owned also.
Yeah, I was going into the week thinking, because I was looking at the pricing on DraftStreet, and both Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers are around 16. And I was thinking all week, well, Brees is the guy that I'd rather own than Rodgers because Brees might need to put up points against Buffalo. Buffalo is the only team other than Denver that scored 20-plus points every single game this year. So he might need to put up points in a way that Aaron Rodgers might not need to, because the last time we saw Minnesota, they put up a goose egg offensively. They got a special teams touchdown against a Giants defense that's very poor. So my thought process was, well, Eddie Lacy's going to be the man. He's going to be grinding out. They don't even need to worry about the passing game. Why risk it? No Randall Cobb, no James Jones, no Jermichael Finley, just ground and pound with Lacy. Then I did some research on Aaron Rodgers. And he is a stat pattern. I looked up the games that they won by more than 2 touchdowns over the last 3 years, and he averages 3.9 passing touchdowns in those games. He piles on. He doesn't care. He is going to pad his stats when the game gets out of hand, and that's the one thing that makes me a little bit nervous about Lacy. I still think he scores this week, so I think he's a great play on FanDuel. I've got him on some other lineups as well, but I went into the week thinking Brees greater than Rodgers, and Lacy was going to be my guy across the industry. And I still like Lacy a lot because, like I said, I think he gets 1 touchdown. But I think the likelihood of 2 is a little bit less when Aaron Rodgers goes into let me pad my stats mode.
I just tweeted this out, but you just blew my mind. That just blew my mind. Now you've got me nervous, too. You've got me nervous to play Lacy because, really, I had him in every FanDuel lineup. And I don't have him as much on DraftStreet because I feel like there are other running backs. I love to load up on the running backs in one cheapie tight end. That's my strategy for DraftStreet on most occasions. So I felt like there were some premier running backs that you would want to roster, and I did not use him there. But on FanDuel, that is interesting, and it makes you kind of want to play some more passing options on FanDuel as far as even Boykin on there who could have another big day. And, of course, Jordy Nelson. Jordy Nelson, his price tag is not that high.
No, it's really cheap. I know I'm trying to think of the sites that have really stood out to me. DraftKings, it really stood out to me. You mentioned FanDuel was cheap relative to the other expensive guys. I mean, Jordy Nelson 7,800 is a similar option to guys like, Demaryius Thomas at 8,200. So there's a little bit of a discount on Jordy. I think he's a great play. I think Boykin's a good play in spots too. I'm not backing off Lacy, even though I did that research and it made me a little bit hesitant. I still have Lacy, and I have him on DraftStreet too. I still have him in quite a few places. In general, I think the Packers are going to put up 5 touchdowns with these. So I think everybody's going to get some. I think you have to, if you've made a lineup this weekend and it doesn't have any Packers, I think you should probably revisit that and get some portion of that. I know a lot of people are going to be focusing on Philadelphia and the Giants, Dallas and Detroit, and Washington and Denver, because those are 3 high total games that could get into big time shootouts. But I think the Packers are the surest bet, amongst the surest bets for 30-plus points this weekend. And I think you need parts of their offense because it's such a watered-down and diluted offense that it's going to be Boykin, Nelson, Rodgers, Lacy, and then maybe Corliss gets involved. I mean, there's the other offenses that you're picking from have 5 and 6 parts to them generally that can contribute. The Packers offense is a little bit more condensed these days. So I think you almost have to have some Packers in the lineup if you're playing tonight.
I would agree. I think that, especially on DraftStreet, we'll talk more. I want us to build a lineup, but I want us to get some interaction involved. So we have 33, 34 viewers in the chat. I want you guys to be thinking of a must play for DraftStreet, and we'll put them in the lineup. As far as and so we'll build the lineup later on. As far as defense, though, on DraftStreet, I know you mentioned it in your article for myfantasyfix.com, and I'm glad you did, but the Packers, I feel like, are when I look for defense, I always go from bottom to top. And I feel like when I did that, the Packers were the ones at 33 or 3,500 that immediately stood out, that no one's in that range that has the kind of matchup that they do.
Yeah, and if you look at their game log, they have 7 or more points in 4 straight games. So that's basically double their salary, and in 4 straight games. I'm not sure why they're priced that low. That seems like a little bit of a pricing error to me that's overrating the Minnesota offense, because DraftStreet takes into account opponent strength. They're the one defense that stands out to me. I assume they're going to be very, very heavily owned, because the other part of that is the 3 elite defenses, Kansas City, San Francisco, and Seattle, are all 6.7 or higher. And I think this is going to be a week that a lot of people want to spend at the skill position, so I think people are going to naturally opt towards Green Bay.
Yeah, and Tuttle was talking about on FanDuel just the strategy of paying for defense versus not. So I want to just weigh in on what you think as well, because FanDuel is it's kind of a different animal than DraftStreet is, of course. So yeah, be thinking about your DraftStreet picks. We already have a few that were mentioned. I was just messing with Brett from Fan Throwdown, but he said Fred Jackson is his must-play with C.J. Spiller out. Fish Nerd says Ruben Randall is a must-play on DraftStreet, which is definitely interesting, which is a perfect segue to going over there on FanDuel. And in that Giants game, it was terrible. That Giants game was terrible on Monday. And on FanDuel, they don't adjust the salaries for the Monday night games to the next week, because they always release salaries before that. So with that being said, Eli is at the same price at quarterback, and Victor Cruz is at the same price. What are your thoughts on the Giants this week against the Eagles? Could be a fast-paced game. Is this the week that they break out of their slump?
I'd like to say yes.
Me too.
But I'll be honest, I don't have the balls to play Eli Manning on a main lineup on any site. But I'm going to put a couple $1,000s behind Eli Manning. I'll throw him in some GPPs, but he won't be on a main team for me anywhere. Cruz, and this is like what, 3rd or 4th week in a row that we've talked about this, that the pricing feels like a must play. And he hasn't rewarded us at all. And last week he dropped a touchdown. It was incredibly frustrating. And I know Mr. Tuttle had some dollars riding on it. I had some dollars riding on it. I know Ben was tweeting about we all did. We were all on the Victor Cruz train. And the price still hasn't moved. And the Eagles, I wrote this in my opening drive article this week, which I'm trying to get up in front of me. The Eagles allow the most targets per game to wide receivers of any team in the league, just under 30. The next most targeted team in terms of wide receivers per game is Buffalo at 27.5. So they average 2.5 more targets a game to wide receivers than any other team in the league. The last time these two teams played, Cruz had 12 targets. I think Randall had 13 and Nix had 12. All 3 of them were double digits. It's hard to envision a scenario where Victor Cruz doesn't get 10 to 15 targets. And for that price, I'm going to take my chance. I'm going to keep rolling him out there. If I know he's going to get 10 to 15 targets, it's just too much opportunity against, not the greatest secondary. So Victor Cruz, in my mind, is near some of those other names that you were tweeting out to kind of build the foundation of a roster. He's pretty close, in my mind, to a must-play on FanDuel.
I agree. And he's in my main lineup. And so I was hoping to see him in a few lineups, and I don't think I did. And I think that there are a handful of wide receivers that you can feel safe with, relatively safe. I'm not sure you can feel safe with them, but that just give you a lot of upside in their floor. I mean, even though Cruz didn't have his best game, he still got you, what was it, 7.5 points, 8 points maybe? Which is not.
Yeah, he had five for 50, so 7.5.
Yeah, so it wasn't terrible. His floor is still pretty high, and obviously he has a really high ceiling. Another guy that Quats mentioned is Fitzgerald. I know I've heard a lot of people high on him, facing a a secondary that gives up long plays. He's finally healthy. Your thoughts on Larry this week?
Love him. FanDuel's the one site that I don't love him as much as the others because his price is still pretty elevated there. His price is 7,100, same as Cruz. And I don't think that's a bad price for Larry Fitzgerald. It's just many other sites you can get him at a much deeper discount. The challenge for me is I've ended up opting for Michael Floyd in a couple spots over Larry Fitzgerald, strictly based on price. And I wrote this in today's opening drive. Now, Atlanta's a great matchup. They've given up at least two passing touchdowns to every single team that they've faced this year. But if you look at the difference between Fitzgerald and Floyd on the season, it's half a target per game, the difference between the two of them. And obviously Fitzgerald's a better player, but the price difference between the two players on a lot of sites is a lot more than half a target per game in the same matchup would suggest. And the big difference, the reason they have a big difference in pricing is because Fitzgerald scored 4 times and Floyd has scored just once. Now, Fitzgerald has 6 red zone targets and he scored 4 times on the season, not all in the red zone. That's, a pretty decent conversion rate. Floyd has 6 red zone targets and only has that 1 red zone touchdown, so not as great of a conversion rate. He's playing a high percentage of snaps, though, and so Floyd is a guy, especially like on DraftStreet, where he's just 6K, that I've been looking to. I think Fitz is a very nice play across the industry, though. He's in our write-ups, in our value plays for the wide receiver spot as well.
Yes, he is. Both those guys are good options. I'm glad you said Floyd, though, because I saw a few other people that are high on him, and if that game goes into shootout mode and there are points put on the board, he's an interesting play. Well, what about the quarterback? I mean, if we're expecting both those guys to have decent matchups, Carson Palmer might be one of those GPP plays.
Yeah, I love him as a GPP play. Again, just like Eli, I'm not sure I'd have the stones to throw him into a main team lineup, and I certainly wouldn't do it on a one quarterback site. But you look at like DraftKings, I think he's 5,500. Mm-hmm. You could build a really nice loaded set of skill position players around Carson Palmer, and he's going to fling it because they're not going to be able to run the ball. They haven't really been able to run the ball on anyone all year. So you're a pretty good bet for 40 to 45 pass attempts as long as their time of possession isn't totally out of whack, which sometimes Atlanta can do that to teams because Matt Ryan runs a really nice ball control offense. But I think you're a pretty good bet for 40 to 45 passes. The key for where you want to play Palmer is being sensitive to the sites that take away 2 points for interceptions as opposed to 1 point. It seems like a small thing, but when the guy is almost guaranteed to throw an interception every single game, it's a difference of 25 pass yards. So I'd be sensitive to using Palmer on sites that have 1 negative point for interceptions, and I prefer to use him on 2 quarterback sites, but I do think he's a very interesting GPP play for where he's priced, given the fact that Atlanta has allowed 2 passing touchdowns to every quarterback they faced this year, no matter who it is. Whether it's Mike Glennon or whether it's Drew Brees, they basically allowed 2 passing touchdowns to almost everybody. So I think it feels like a game that's pretty safe for Palmer to throw for 275 and 2 scores. The question is how many interceptions will erase part of that value.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not playing him on any one quarterback sites, but I do think that on 2 quarterback sites, I mean, like DraftStreet, you're not heavily penalized there for turnovers, are you?
No, it's -1. It's -1. I think the only ones that are really tough, I think it's Star Street is -2. Yeah. And Fantasy Feud is -2, I believe. Those ones are a little bit tougher. But in general, on a 2 quarterback site, he's fine. And then for GPPs and tournaments on a 1 quarterback site, I think he's a great play. And I don't know how popular he's going to be because I think everybody just naturally hates Carson Palmer. But I think he's the perfect type of guy for a tournament because, just with the volume of opportunities that they throw the ball in the matchup, he could easily walk into 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, and it wouldn't surprise me if he walked out of there with that.
Yes. I want to get on to a few other games. If you're just now tuning in, this is Insiders TV. I'm Soccer Dave, David Kitchen. Joining me is Drew Dinkmeyer, at Drew Dinkmeyer on Twitter, and he hails from myfantasyfix.com. We're talking about NFL, talking about certain games. One game of note that a lot of people are talking about is this Denver Broncos Washington Redskins game. There are a lot of different theories out there, a lot of different angles. You have a lot of different players in play with this game. And there's questions such as, the Roy Halou and Alfred Morris angle. The Peyton's arm, is it where it needs to be? Which one of the receivers are going to be? Are you going to use? Is this the week that Demaryius Thomas finally does something? If he didn't catch that duck in the end zone, he was going to cost a lot of people money last week.
Yeah, well, he did, and he was one of two receivers who got into the end zone, and there was a third receiver who didn't get into the end zone, who was making plays all over the field.
I forgot. I'm sorry.
So I don't want to hear complaints about Demaryius Thomas not living up to. Because if I had Demaryius Thomas, I'd be joining Mr. Tuttle in Vegas, but I did not. So let's break this down. I think Washington's side of the ball is pretty easy, right? I mean, generally they're a condensed offense. This is usually you get Alfred Morris, Pierre Garcon, and Robert Griffin III. We had the fourth option and the fifth option introduced last week, Jordan Reed and Roy Halou. Halou and Morris are becoming more of a timeshare, in part because Washington's played from behind a lot this season, and in part because Halou is really good, and Washington has just figured this out. And he's a good complement to Alfred Morris. Now, if you think about how this game is going to go, I would think most people would think Denver's probably going to play from ahead. If Denver's going to play from ahead, you're probably going to see more Roy Halou on the field. So I think that kind of takes Alfred Morris out of the equation a little bit. Plus, the run defense side of the ball, especially on the interior line, Denver's not bad there. They've allowed a lot of numbers on the passing side, part of that in garbage time, and part because teams are just racking up plays against them because the Broncos offense plays so fast. So I think you can take Alfred Morris out of the equation. I think Halou is more of a cheap flyer GPP kind of play, preferably on PPR sites. So I think you really focus your attention on RG3, Garcon, and Jordan Reed. And I think all three of those guys are really good plays. I prefer Garcon in RG3 as opposed to Reed a little bit more this week, in part because I think Reed's price in some places has risen. Like DraftStreet, I think his price is a little bit elevated. There are other places he's priced fine, but like FanDuel, he's priced at $5,400. I'd rather just have Tony Gonzalez at $5,600. So there's not a lot of places that I'm super excited about Jordan Reed this week. DraftKings is a spot that I do like him, but I like Garcon and RG3 as a combo better. I think all the tape that Reed put out there is going to draw a lot of attention this week. I think Garcon is going to get a lot of one-on-one coverage. No Champ Bailey. I think it's a good matchup for him. And on the other side of the ball, if you're concerned about Peyton Manning's arm, maybe you just don't pay up for Peyton Manning this week. That's fine. But what are the potential ramifications of his arm strength not being there? Well, one is that he's probably going to take less shots down the field. So when you think about their passing attack, how does it really operate? Who operates in the short part of the field and who operates in the deep part of the field? Well, the short part of the field is usually Wes Welker and then Demaryius Thomas on screens. And most of Eric Decker's stuff is deep down the field. So if I'm choosing wide receivers from Denver and I'm concerned about Peyton's arm strength, Demaryius and Welker are the guys I'm going to gravitate towards a little bit more. Julius Thomas is always going to be more of just a pure red zone threat. And, he's not a guy that they use a ton from 20 to 20. They use him a lot more inside the 20. So his role is always kind of stable. But I think if picking between the wide receivers, I'd rather have Demaryius or Welker this week than Decker. I also think that Manning historically likes to keep his receivers kind of even. And after last week, the one guy who didn't score was Welker. So I kind of think Welker scores this week. It's the way he's always done things. And I know a lot of people will say that's a stupid theory and it's not that easy, but it kind of is that easy for the Broncos offense. And they've done this throughout the season. And so I think Welker scores this week.
Wait, is that like a psychological angle that you're playing?
Oh, boy, here we go.
Is it?
It is slightly psychological.
Okay. I don't have a problem with that. It was funny, though, because me and my good friend, Mr. Tuttle 05, were talking about that, and he accuses me. And I said there's two theories. And I said there's some people that they do play the angles for bobblehead night, as an example, and then I don't go that far. But there's bobblehead nights and returning to your home state or stadium or the team that traded you. And then there are just the stat heads that take that completely out. And he said, I bet that Drew would be in my corner. And I'm more of a balanced corner. I think I'm more in the middle. But it's funny to hear you say that. So I I barely took AP anywhere 2 weeks ago. I just thought that was an angle. I didn't say that. But it's funny, though, that, Drew, you say that Peyton Manning wants to balance out the receivers. It sounds like that's not a stat, is it?
No, that would be a more psychological angle.
Okay, well.
But I would say it's a rare exception, and I would say it also fits. I mean, there's so few guys that I think can do that, like in the league. Like, I think Aaron Rodgers could probably do that if he wanted to. There's so few offenses that are that good. I think if you look back at Harrison and Wayne's numbers throughout the years in the game logs, and there's a lot of alternating performances there. And I think Manning's one of the few guys that can control the game in a way that allows that to happen. So if I'm choosing receivers, I like Welker this week. I think it fits, especially if you've got concerns over arm strength. I mean, Welker would be the guy that you would target. And also, Welker and Demaryius also have the two best matchups, the two weaker corners that they'd be facing, or they likely will line up against. Decker will draw the stronger one. So I like those two. I think Moreno's a fine play, too, on sites where you can get him cheap. It's just it's a price point thing because the upside, I mean, all his performance is touchdown dependent. So the upside is he gets that 3-touchdown game like he had against Jacksonville. But a more modest and realistic upside is, high teens points. He's probably not going to burst off 150 total yards. So you're looking at kind of high teens points. You got to be price sensitive on him. DraftKings is the one spot that I noticed that his price is really down compared to the rest of the industry.
Yes. It's good to hear you say that, though, because I do think that sometimes you have to play the psychological angle, which was my point. So thank you, Drew, for that. I am sure I am going to be getting some sort of hate Skype message here soon from.
I'm sure I'll be getting it. How dare you turn on me? We talked about this.
Because I told him because I mentioned one week that he wanted to get Demaryius Thomas involved because he hadn't been involved, and he said basically I was foolish for playing the psychological angle. Anyways, that's what's great about daily fantasy because you do have so many theories. He says, and how did DT work that week? He didn't. He didn't work that week. It was bad. However, that was still in my factoring process. And some people like to play, Nasterman mentioned not just bobbleheads and like playing in your home state or teams that trade you, but birthdays. A lot of people play people on their birthdays. In NBA, I like to fade people around their birthdays because generally they've been out partying.
Up in the club.
Yes. So up in the club, if you're referencing the popular culture.
Champagning and campaigning, according to Jalen Rose's NBA preview with Bill Simmons.
Oh, man. It's about that time. Speaking of Royce White, released from the Sixers. Big shocker.
The long drive home.
Yes. Yep. He's probably taken the bus and wrapped in bubble wrap right now. Anyways, let's get on to the game. The reason why I think Decker might be the best play over there on FanDuel is because his price is just the cheapest and he's leading the team in targets. So I think you take those two into consideration and he's going to get something. And I understand what you're saying as far as his arm strength, but we don't know if anything is wrong with his arm strength for certain. There were certainly some ugly balls after that sack, though.
And I agree on the point with Decker on FanDuel. I think he's the best play. He's like $1,700 cheaper than everybody else. So I think that's the right play on FanDuel. I think on sites where all three are priced evenly, I would prefer Welker and Demaryius over Decker. But on sites that there's a huge pricing discrepancy, Decker's a fine play as well.
I'm glad that Napster Man got my ugly balls comment. He's always one.
He's always on top of those ugly balls.
Ugly balls after the sack. It's going to be a good day. Alrighty then. Let's move along to that not the Tampa Bay game. Ugly balls got me all discombobulated. Let's move on to the Patriots game. You think Amendola plays this week?
The question is not if he plays, it's more how long does he last, right? Limited in practice on Wednesday, limited in practice today. We're going to know Sunday. I wouldn't risk him in a Thursday lineup unless you're on DraftKings and you can switch it out. If he does play, I think he's an interesting play. I think whoever is the primary slot receiver for New England is an interesting play. So whether it's Amendola or Edelman, the Dolphins have been good on the outside, especially Brent Grimes. He's playing really, really well this year. So I would try to avoid some of the outside receivers, outside of maybe GPP plays. But figuring out Tompkins and Dobson, it's totally flipping a coin at this point. Who's going to be on the field more? The 2 weeks prior to last week, it was Dobson. This week, it was Tompkins. So I'm not even going to mess around with that situation outside of maybe some GPPs. I noticed there are a few spots where those guys are like minimum. And for minimum in a tournament with Tom Brady, I'll take my chances. But I'm not going to do it on a main team.
Yes. And speaking of Tom Brady, obviously going back to Amendola, it's only 6 points something on DraftStreet, which is crazy. So I wanted him so bad. I wanted to play him so bad in my lineup. Not wanted him so bad. I wanted him in my lineup so bad. Tuttle and Papa Cub. But I couldn't do it. And with Tom Brady, I've taken him the past 3 weeks on DraftStreet. 2 of the weeks I was bailed out by other players. Last week, not so. And I paired him with Gronk, and there was 2, maybe 3 instances where he was so close to getting a touchdown, even another touchdown. It just seems like they are trying to spite all fantasy owners, and this is a psychological angle that is purely not true, but they're trying to spite all fantasy owners by saying we're going to run the ball whenever it's inside the 4, 3. There's no more QB sneaks for Brady. There's no more passes to Gronk. It's all going to be running the ball to Bolden or help me out here. Other running back that scored.
LeGarrette Blount?
Ridley, who I know that you like as far as maybe later on in the game, slowing down the game because of the other side of the ball. What do you think happens here?
Well, when you were commenting on how often they run the ball in the red zone, I had to bring up some stats. So I'm trying to check out on my spreadsheet how often, and you're right, they're running the ball 59% of the time in the red zone this year. That is 3rd most in the NFL, behind Washington. Or excuse me, I'm looking at 2012 numbers. They're running the ball 54% of the time in the red zone, which is still very high. It's like top 6 or 7. The league average is about 45%, so you're right there. In terms of the game and how I see it playing out from a DFS perspective, I do like Brady this week. I like him more on 2 quarterback sites than 1 quarterback site. At some point, he's going to be back to being Tom Brady. I don't buy that this is a big decline for him. I think a lot of this is matchup oriented. He's never had good games against the Jets. He's always struggled against them. He's playing down receivers earlier. They haven't had a really friendly matchup in a while. So, the last time we saw him in a friendly matchup, he played well against the Falcons. And this is a pretty friendly matchup against Miami. Outside of Brent Grimes, I listed this in the fix today, but the wide receiver ratings and grades on Pro Football Focus, the inside cornerback, linebacker, and safety grades on Pro Football Focus for coverage for Miami, almost every guy's negative in a severe way. So I think that plays well for whoever's on the inside, whether it's Amendola or Edelman, and then Gronk. And specifically Rashad Jones, the strong safety, has really struggled in coverage. He's allowed 21 of 25 targets to be completed. So you're talking about 84% completion rate there. So I think Guys up the middle are good. I think Brady gets it back. I think he throws 2 touchdowns this week. Again, probably not going to use them on a 1 quarterback site, but on a 2 quarterback site where his price is depressed, I'm totally fine using them.
Very nice. Let's get to some interaction. If you have any questions for us, feel free to ask it in the chat, and we'll get to it. I want to go over the Pick 5. Let's see if I can pull it up. The screen, that is. Michael Vick versus Colin Kaepernick.
I'm going to go Vic, and I don't think that one's hard at all.
Really?
Yeah. I saw that this was like 50-50 on your guys' page, and I was surprised.
I mean, Kaepernick looked decent and is against Jacksonville. I mean, I think that's why people are looking at him. And Vic, there's still some health uncertainties right there. I think that if you factor in those two and factor in the fact that Colin Kaepernick is running more, that is where you get people that are on the Kaepernick train. But I'll ride Vic with you.
Well, here's my reasoning. Okay, so the last time the 49ers, really blew someone out, and their defense was scoring against Houston on that Sunday night game, Cap threw the ball 15 times. And so here's the thing. If you tell me that Kaepernick is going to have his hands involved, whether running or passing, 35 times, I would agree with you that he's a very strong play and he's a really good value in the industry. But there's a chance with that play calling that he's only involved in 15 to 25 plays. And on most sites to beat Vic, or on most sites to meet value, he's going to need 2 touchdowns one way or the other. And I'm just concerned that, they get off to a 21-0 lead. He's got 1 touchdown. Gore's got another. The defense has another. And they just completely take the air out of the ball. So I'm a little bit concerned in terms of Kaepernick that he's just not going to have any reason to throw in the second half. And that's why I think Vic is a clear-cut guy.
Fair enough. Julius Thomas or Antonio Brown?
I'll take Antonio Brown, especially on PPR sites like Draft Day. Antonio Brown's, he's averaging like 8 catches a game. And if you look at some of the numbers that Oakland has given up to number 1 wide receivers this year, it's nuts. I rolled through this in the fix today, but, Wayne went for 896.1, Shorts 893.0, Demaryius Thomas 1094.0, Garcon 659.1, Keenan Allen 6-115.1. The only guy who hasn't basically had 8 catches or a touchdown is Dwayne Bowe, and they just don't throw to him. So I think Antonio Brown's a really safe guy for 7 to 9 catches this week. That'll translate to 80 to 90 yards and a good shot at a score. I'll take him over Julius.
All right. I will take Antonio Brown also, and he's also going to be in a lot of FanDuel lineups. We'll talk about that in a second. Marshawn Lynch or LaShawn McCoy?
I've got Lynch ranked higher than McCoy. It's closer on a full PPR. I think Lynch is a lot safer, but I think McCoy might have a little bit more upside just because of what he contributes in the passing game. But, that St. Louis run defense is horrific, and Lynch feels about as safe as you can get for 90 yards and a touchdown this week. He's got the big-time upside to potentially score twice. McCoy has just 3 touchdowns all season. With Vic back, I would expect him to potentially share more work in the red zone. So I like Lynch more than McCoy.
Demaryius or no Sean?
Pretty much a coin flip to me, but I'll go Demaryius. On a PPR site, I like the receiver over the running back a little bit more.
Yeah, I would agree. Kaepernick versus Vic, I don't think that's as clear-cut as you do, but you present more of an argument than I do, which is he's playing against the Jaguars and he's been running more lately. That's really all I have as far as a defense.
Well, let me talk about that because Quads brings this up in the chat that per our projections on Fantistics, which we make available to the subscribers at My Fantasy Fix, the Cap is our 7th overall quarterback. And first, I don't do the projections. Those are done by Anthony Perry, our statistician and founder. So those are representative of his opinions and his quantitative model. And I think a lot of the quant models are going to rate Jacksonville's defense is so bad that Cap is going to rise towards the tops of a lot of these projection models' rankings. But I think what you have to realize is that model is basing Kaepernick's average opportunity set against a really bad defense. and it's inflating the value. So if he gets his usual, 25 to 30 touches in the pass and running game, I think he will be very good. But I'm personally concerned that he doesn't get that many. And if you weight down his touches in the game, pass attempts or runs, that projection would come down along with it. And I think that's where projection systems can lead you astray sometimes. We'll see. I could be really wrong on this, and he gets all the opportunities he usually does, and he'll be a great play. But I'm just concerned that Houston game is fresh in my mind. 15 pass attempts, not a lot of runs. They didn't need him. They weren't going to risk him. And I have concerns that that'll come up again against Jacksonville.
Well, like I said, I will go where you go as far as Vic over Kaepernick. I just don't think that it surprised me honestly to hear you say that it wasn't even close. So that's interesting that was your response, but you backed it up with stats. So there was no psychological angles there as far as Vic wanting to overtake.
Well, they kind of are psychological angles to some extent, and Tuttle's going to kill me after this. But I mean, it's me basically saying that I think Jim Harbaugh is going to feel like there's no reason to risk my quarterback against the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah.
Or Jaguars, or Jaguars, or however Tuttle pronounces it.
You are in the total doghouse. That is for certain.
I believe it's a cat house now.
Oh, he doesn't. He's about to not have any claws, so it's okay. Jared Boykin or Larry Fitzgerald. This is an interesting one. I mean, who would have thought that this would be an interesting play? But
that makes me sad. Like, just looking at that makes me sad for Larry.
That they're ruining his career.
There. I don't know, Larry. I don't know how we got here, but you don't belong in that conversation. But literally, I mean, that's a toss-up to me. It really is. And I'll opt with Fitzgerald just because I think he's the more skilled player. But from a projection standpoint, I think they're almost equals.
So if you had to pick, you'd pick Larry.
No, I said I'd lean with Larry just because I think he's a better player, but I don't feel strongly about it.
Well, there you have it. Like you said, it's crazy that is actually a real matchup, but it is. And so if you want to copy if you want to play the psychological angle of what Drew would do, then go for it. We'll see. Mr. Tuttle says, example of me playing a psychological angle. It's George Washington Carver's birthday. RG3 loves peanut butter, so you should play RG3. No, that is not exactly.
I hadn't even considered all that, but now that you mention it.
Yes. And
only adds to my RG3 love this week.
He does love peanut butter. I have seen it so. No, I mean those. It's an interesting to go back and forth. I'm not that high on psychological angles at all. Mine is more getting into the heads of players as far as the game goes. So it's interesting, and I'm glad to see Tuttle coming over to our side, Dink. So thanks for that, for presenting some sort of sanity to our discussion. I wouldn't say it was an argument because we don't argue. It is a DFS discussion. Let's quickly get on to some teams. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. Josh Gordon or Jordan Cameron this week?
I'm not enthralled with either one of them. I think volume is going to be a little bit of a challenge against the Kansas City offense that slows the game down. And I think the game's going to be played pretty tight, so I don't think Cleveland's going to have any reason to try to speed the game up. So if I'm choosing between those two players in a game that I think is going to be slow, I want the bigger play potential with Josh Gordon. But to be very honest, I put those guys in our cheat sheets as potential GPP plays because I think they'll be low ownership guys. But I'm probably not going to use either one of them this weekend.
Yeah, after what Josh Gordon did to me, It was brutal. It was brutal what he did to me by not catching those touchdowns. I mean, they targeted him so much in the red zone, and he couldn't come away with one catch. It was so bad.
The other part of that is Jason Campbell likes to throw the ball deep, and if you're gonna get any value out of it, it's gonna come in one play. I don't see a game where either one of those guys are putting up 6, 7, 8 catches and you're grinding out value. It's gonna have to come from one play. And since Campbell, I mean, it takes him forever to unload it, but I guess I'd go Gordon. But you won't see either one of those guys in my lineups this weekend.
Ditto. Not touching the Cameron or the Gordon this week. Let's go with FanDuel. If you have somebody in the chat, let's see what you have to say. But I'm going to put in some core players. Lacey, this is what I ask on Twitter. So Lacey, wide receivers. Well, I'll let you pick, Drew. Antonio Brown or Pierre Garçon?
I have Garçon right now.
Okay.
So I'll go with Garçon.
And we can always add Antonio Brown. That's what I said. So kicker, just go since he's 5,000. Henry. All right.
Whoa. Can we go with Dan Bailey? And let me tell you the sole reason why. If you take Alex Henry, and he's a good play, he's not a bad play, there is a potential chance that you will see one of these ridiculous Chip Kelly 2-point conversions when you're thinking you're getting a free point, and it will be the most frustrating part, well, one of the more frustrating parts of your day. And for that reason, I've stayed away from Alex Henry for the last 3 weeks because I had that happen a few weeks ago. And so I prefer Dan Bailey because I know there's going to be no tomfoolery on extra points.
Well, fair enough. You have Bailey, and I don't think that's a bad play either. I just was saying Henry because he was 5,000, so I wanted to.
So was Bailey.
Well, exactly, but I wanted to remove as much of the discussion about kicker as possible from the show. Thank you, Drew, for not allowing that to happen.
Well, my father just mentioned in the chat that what if Henry runs it in for a 2-point conversion? I hadn't even thought of that. So now I'm waffling.
I don't think you can get credit for that on FanDuel. Maybe you can.
What? You would have to get credit for that.
Maybe
didn't this happen like last year or the year before when Jay Feely threw a touchdown?
Yes, it happened. I think it was 2 years ago.
Yeah. So there you go. Maybe Henry is the better player.
Well, maybe he is. I was actually at the
find out next on our kicker segment.
At the Vanderbilt Georgia game last week, Vanderbilt's kicker ran it into the end zone. It was a pivotal play. Okay, let's get on to who is a pivotal play for you now. Seeing these guys,
Tony Gonzalez would be the next play that I would lock in.
He was the guy that I had locked in last week. You know how it did for me? Do you know?
Yeah, I didn't agree with that last week. I probably should have said more on that topic.
Yes, you should have.
I should have said something. I was not on Tony Gonzalez last week, and not because of I thought he was going to get a ton of attention. I didn't love the price point last week, and I ended up with. Who did I play? I played a lot of Finley. I played a ton of Jermichael Finley last week.
Yes.
And Finley was like $1,300 cheaper, $900 cheaper, something like that. So.
In the Thursday night lineup, I played Tony Gonzalez, but I played either Finley or Gronk on FanDuel.
Yeah, those were the guys I was focused on, and I played both of them on DraftStreet and got off Jordan Reed. That was frustrating.
Yes.
I should have played tight end.
Jordan Reed was in my Thursday night lineups, which actually worked out on DraftStreet. I found out that my DraftStreet Thursday night lineups are a lot better than the Sunday lineups. And Tuttle and I were talking about going with your gut. So that might have something to do with it if you're playing the psychological
I think it's because we're talking through all these great lineups on the show.
Yes.
I think that's what it is.
Yes, like Brandon Jacobs 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly. Without my astute observations on Brandon Jacobs, how would you have cashed double ups? I don't know.
I don't know either. Certain player for me, I'm just going to go with Frank Gore.
Okay.
I think that his salary is pretty low. He's going to get some red zone opportunities to
We,
punch the ball in.
we are now 50% of the way to the exact lineup I have in tonight's games.
Well, this is my lineup as well, except I didn't have Tony Gonzalez. I did not.
Okay.
Let's see. Someone mentioned a good FanDuel play in the chat. Come on, you can do it. There's only a 4-second delay. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000, 5 1,000.
Tuttle is saying that Cam is wearing Superman shoes, and this is a good reason to play him. And nobody knows psychological angles like Tuttle.
That is why he is in my DraftStreet lineup, only 13,000. Christian Ponder was not going to be in this lineup. Screw you guys in the chat. Drew, who would you like? It doesn't have to be the guy in your lineup tonight.
Let's go with Victor Cruz.
Okay. I'll go ahead and pair Victor with Eli, just so we have a little bit of
we can go buck wild now.
diversity. Yes, we can go buck wild.
Okay. So in this case, with these Thursday night lineups, there's a bunch of defenses that we like. Click over the defenses real quick, and we can go anywhere we want with that. You've got Seattle, Kansas City, 6,000, 5,900. If you need a little bit of salary relief, you've got Green Bay down there. But we're probably going to spend around 6,000 to 5,900, which leaves us with what, 8,500?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go back to the wide receivers.
Okay.
Let's see what we got around 8,500. It looks like we're looking at Demaryius.
Fair enough.
Demaryius or Welker. And I told you I thought Welker, which would open up being able to use San Fran's D if we wanted.
Yes. I like what DraftStreet says. He mentioned the Saints defense at only 5,100.
Yeah.
They're definitely in play, and it will allow us to play a
Dez or Calvin?
I don't know if it would allow us to play Calvin or not. But let's see. Yes, it would. We can play Calvin if we wanted to.
That's a cool lineup. I dig it.
There you go. Well, I'm going to put this bad boy in. Let me make sure it's not okay, it's only 25. I can risk that. By the way, we lost our $50 lineup last week to Condia. It was bad. It was so bad. Part of that is because we created on Thursday and it was a Sunday lineup, and so by Sunday there was some news like the Jermichael Finley stuff, and the Gronk thing was big. And we still had Jordan Reed, we still had Tony Gonzalez as our tight end. So there was $50 down the drain. Hopefully we get 20 of that back from that lineup we just created. We'll call it a night after that, and we'll get to tomorrow. We have the NFL show with myself, Grant Gerton from Fanium, and our own Mr. Tuttle 05. See what he thinks someone else is thinking about someone thinking something, because we all know he likes to get inside of the heads of everybody, and I feel like he's already inside of my head. Tomorrow night, we'll be going over the football show. Benjamin Pritchett, a.k.a. Natural Slugger, and myself will be handling the duties. It will be at least an hour and a half of just craziness. It's already been a little bit salty in our chats this week. There's been some pretty heated discussions, not arguments, but discussions. So expect tomorrow night to be extra salty with some bite there. Ben and I have known each other for 25 years, so we can go back and forth at each other like brothers. He's like a brother to me.
Now, in that 25 years, have you guys figured out the signal for bathroom break yet? Because that's the real important part of the Friday night show that everybody's interested in watching.
Fun story. I used to wet the bed when I was little, and I peed on his couch. And I was like 7 or 8, and I just flipped over the cushion and never told him till later.
Well, revelations.
I mean, that's what you get with us. Anyways, I'm going to queue up some Tupac before we go into just uncharted territory. Join us tomorrow. We'll be there, and we'll hopefully not be talking about this anymore. Thanks for tuning in. Drew, tell them where they can find you.
MyFantasyFix.com for all of your daily fantasy football needs, and on Twitter at Drew Dinkmeyer.
Fair enough.
Machiavellian is
Yeah.
all through your body. The blows like a 12-gauge shot. Feel me? And God said he should send his one begotten son.
FantasyInsiders.com, y'all.
Follow me.
Yeah.
My flesh, my flesh. Come with